Admiral Chen Wei-lin stood at the observation window of orbital station Prometheus, watching the distant stars twinkle with an indifference that seemed almost cruel given what was coming. Behind her, the holographic display painted a terrifying picture. 743 vessels of the Velthari Dominion, their biomechanical hulls gleaming with that distinctive organic sheen that had become synonymous with galactic conquest.
"They'll reach Earth orbit in 18 hours, Commander Rodriguez said, his voice steady despite the fear that lurked behind his eyes. "The combined fleet is. We lost 80% at the Battle of Titan. What's left won't last 15 minutes against that armada."
Chen didn't respond immediately. She was 62 years old, the youngest fleet admiral in United Earth Navy history, and she had never felt more helpless. The Velthari had appeared from beyond the galactic rim 3 years ago, and in that time they had conquered 17 spacefaring civilizations. Their technology was centuries beyond anything humanity had developed. Their weapons sliced through modern shields like they weren't there. Their propulsion systems defied known physics, and their tactical AI could predict fleet movements with uncanny accuracy. Humanity's modern fleet, sleek vessels of titanium alloy and quantum-shielded hulls, had proven woefully inadequate. The ships that represented 300 years of technological advancement crumbled like paper before the Velthari onslaught. "There's nothing left," Rodriguez continued. "The orbital defense platforms are still under construction. The planetary shields are at 40% capacity. Admiral, we need to begin evacuation protocols. The underground bunkers can save perhaps 2 billion. "Out of 12 billion, Chen finished. "That's not acceptable, Commander." "With respect, Admiral, acceptable or not, it's reality. The Velthari don't negotiate. They don't accept surrender. Every species they've encountered has been either exterminated or enslaved. At least this way, some of humanity survives." Chen finally turned from the window. Her weathered face, marked by years of service and stress, carried an expression that Rodriguez couldn't quite read. It wasn't despair, that he would have understood. It was something else, something almost calculating. "Have you ever visited the Smithsonian Orbital, Commander?" The non sequitur caught Rodriguez off guard. The museum complex? Admiral, I don't understand." "I used to take my grandchildren there," Chen continued, walking past him toward her command console. "They have a remarkable collection. Ships from every era of human spacefaring history. The Enterprise replica, the first Mars colonial transport, the generation ships that were being built when we discovered faster-than-light travel and rendered them obsolete before they ever launched." "Admiral, with respect, what does this have to do with—" "They also have the warships, Commander. The old warships. From before the unification, before the contact era, before we learned that the galaxy was full of other species with weapons that made ours look like children's toys." Rodriguez's brow furrowed. "You mean the pre-contact military vessels? Admiral, those are relics. They've been decommissioned for over 2 centuries. They're museum pieces, literally. Their weapon systems are so primitive, they probably couldn't scratch the paint on a Velthari scout ship." Chen smiled, and there was something unsettling about that smile. Something that spoke of secrets long buried and desperate measures. "That's what everyone believes, Commander. That's what we wanted everyone to believe." She pulled up a classified file on her console, one that required not only her biometric signature, but also a code phrase that had been passed down through fleet admirals for 230 years. Rodriguez watched as layer after layer of encryption peeled away, revealing documents and schematics that predated the contact era. "Project Lazarus," Chen said. "Initiated in 2147, 3 years after first contact with the Centauri Collective. Humanity had just joined the galactic community, and we were suddenly the smallest fish in a very large pond. Our technology was centuries behind even the youngest spacefaring species. We were vulnerable.
I've never heard of this project.
You weren't supposed to. No one was. The project was classified at the highest possible level, known only to sitting fleet admirals and the Secretary General of the United Earth Government. Even the crews who maintained it didn't know its true purpose.
Rodriguez leaned closer to the display, his eyes widening as he processed what he was seeing. These are maintenance logs for the museum ships? Not just maintenance, Commander. Upgrades. Continuous, secret upgrades. For 230 years, while those ships sat in orbital museums being gawked at by tourists and mocked by visiting alien dignitaries, a classified team has been keeping them combat-ready. More than combat-ready. They've been enhanced with every piece of salvaged or reverse-engineered technology we've acquired since first contact.
But why? Why maintain antique vessels when we could have used those resources to build modern ships?
Chen pulled up another display, this one showing the technical specifications of the current UN fleet. Because modern ships are designed to galactic standards, Commander, we build them to be compatible with galactic dock facilities, to use universal fuel systems, to interface with common navigation networks. We did that because we had to. We were the newcomers, and we needed to fit in.
And the old ships? The old ships were designed before we knew anyone else existed. They were designed by humans, for humans, with no consideration for galactic standards or compatibility. They're crude, ugly, and inefficient by modern metrics, but they're also completely alien to anyone who studied galactic technology. Rodriguez was beginning to understand. The Velthari Tactical AI, it predicts fleet movements based on known technological parameters. It knows how galactic standard ships maneuver, how their weapons fire, how their shields operate.
Exactly. The Velthari have conquered 17 spacefaring civilizations, all of which used variations of the same basic technological framework. Their AI has never encountered anything truly outside that framework. It's never faced ships that don't follow galactic design principles.
Because no one else was primitive enough to still have pre-galactic technology lying around.
Chen's smile widened. We weren't primitive, Commander. We were paranoid. And now that paranoia might save our species.
She opened a communication channel, her fingers dancing across the console with practiced precision. This is Admiral Chen Wei-Lin. Authorization code Delta 77 Lazarus. Activate all Project Lazarus assets. Authorization confirmed. Wake the old girls up.
Across the solar system, in orbital museums and display hangars, in hidden maintenance bays and classified dry docks, ancient vessels began to stir. Systems that hadn't been publicly active in 2 centuries hummed to life. Fusion reactors, primitive by galactic standards but rugged and reliable, began their startup sequences. Crews that had trained in secret for this very scenario rushed to their stations. And in the main gallery of the Smithsonian Orbital, tourists scattered in confusion as the lights dimmed and the voice of a synthetic intelligence echoed through the halls.
Attention visitors, the museum is now closed. Please proceed to the nearest exit in an orderly fashion. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill.
Velthari Fleet Commander Zaxthral observed the holographic display of the human home system with something approaching boredom. Its 9 feeding tentacles hung limp at its sides, a posture that indicated contempt among its species, while its primary sensory cluster swept across the tactical readout.
Is this truly all they have? It asked, its translator converting the clicks and whistles of its native language into the harsh sounds of galactic common.
47 vessels against 743 of our finest warships? Their main fleet was destroyed at the Titan engagement, Subcommander Velrix reported. These appear to be a mixture of patrol boats, damaged capital ships, and training vessels. Training vessels. Zachthral's feeding tentacles twitched, the Velthari equivalent of bitter laughter. They send their students to die. How quaint. How very human. The Velthari had not thought much of humanity when they first arrived in this region of the galaxy. The species was young, barely 3 centuries into spaceflight, and technologically unremarkable. They had followed the same path as every other species the Velthari had encountered, discovering faster-than-light travel, joining the galactic community, and adopting galactic standard technology wholesale. Predictable. Boring. Easy. Fleet Commander, we're detecting additional drive signatures, a sensor operator reported. Origin point is unusual. Multiple locations throughout the system. Museums, display facilities, orbital galleries. Museums? Velrix's sensory cluster flickered with confusion. What could they possibly? Display the signatures. The holographic map updated, and Zachthrall felt something it hadn't experienced in over a century of conquest. Genuine puzzlement. 118 new signatures were appearing across the human system, their drive patterns unlike anything in Velthari records. "What am I looking at?" Zachthrall demanded. "Unknown, Fleet Commander. The energy signatures don't match any design in our database. The closest comparison would be early Centauri experimental vessels? But those designs were abandoned centuries ago as inefficient." "Inefficient," Zachthrall repeated. It turned its attention to one of the signatures, a vessel emerging from orbit around the humans' 4th planet. The ship was roughly cylindrical, bristling with external weapons platforms and sensor arrays. No sleek lines, no organic curves, no apparent concern for aesthetic harmony. It was ugly. Brutally, unapologetically ugly. Magnify that vessel. The image zoomed in, and Zachthrall's feeding tentacles went rigid with shock. Painted on the vessel's prow, in faded letters that spoke of great age, was a designation in human script. Its translator struggled with the archaic format before finally rendering it. U.S. Missouri, IV. BB-63. "That's a museum ship," Velrix said, its voice carrying a note of incredulity. "Fleet Commander, they're launching museum ships." "How many?" 118 confirmed. Vessel classes vary widely. Some appear to be from the early human spacefaring period, perhaps 3 centuries old. Others are even more primitive, pre-contact designs. Zachthrall felt the tension in its body ease. For a moment, just a moment, it had thought the humans might have some secret weapon, some hidden fleet that could pose a genuine threat. But museum ships? Antiques that should have been recycled for parts decades ago? "The humans have gone mad," it declared. "Desperation has driven them to insanity. They're sending their historical artifacts against a conquest fleet." Laughter rippled through the command center. It was a good joke, the best they'd heard in cycles. Imagine throwing museum pieces against the finest vessels in the Dominion. "Shall I dispatch a squadron to eliminate them?" Velrix asked. "No. Let them come. Let the galaxy see how humanity's last, desperate gamble plays out. Let them watch as their precious relics are vaporized by Velthari might. It will make an excellent propaganda piece for the other species we've yet to liberate." As you command, Fleet Commander.
Zack's thrall turned its attention back to the tactical display, already mentally composing its victory report to the Dominion Overmind. The conquest of Earth would be complete within a standard cycle. Another species added to the list of the subjugated. Another world stripped of resources and its population set to work serving Velthari needs.
So predictable. So boring. So easy.
It couldn't have been more wrong.
Captain Sarah Okonkwo gripped the arms of her command chair as the Missouri 4 shuddered around her. The old battleship was waking up from her long sleep, and like any elderly lady roused before her time, she was doing so with considerable grumbling.
Main reactor at 72% and climbing, Chief Engineer Petrov reported from the engineering station. Containment is stable, but I'm seeing wear on the magnetic bottles that wasn't in the last maintenance report.
Can you compensate?
I can compensate for anything, Captain. You know that. I've been nursing this old girl for 30 years. She's not going to let me down now. Okonkwo nodded, turning her attention to the main view screen. The Mars Orbital Museum was falling away behind them, its tourist attractions and gift shops now empty of the thousands of visitors who had been evacuated over the past 3 hours. Ahead, the stars beckoned, and beyond them, the Velthari Armada. All hands, this is the captain. She activated the ship-wide communication system. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Okonkwo, and I've been waiting for this day my entire career. You've all been briefed on the Lazarus Protocol. You know what's expected of us. But I want to say something that isn't in the briefing materials. She paused, collecting her thoughts. Around her, the bridge crew, veterans who had trained in secret for this very scenario, listened intently. 230 years ago, our ancestors looked up at the stars and saw a galaxy full of species that were older, smarter, and more technologically advanced than us. They could have despaired. They could have accepted that humanity would always be the galaxy's poor cousin, dependent on the charity of more powerful civilizations. Instead, they did something very human. They hedged their bets. Through the view screen, Okonkwo could see other ships of Project Lazarus taking up formation around the Missouri 4. There was the Yamato 3, the ancient Japanese battleship-class vessel that had served as a floating museum restaurant for the past century. The Enterprise 7, maintained in secret as a fully functional heavy cruiser despite officially being nothing more than a replica of humanity's first interstellar explorer. The Bismarck V, whose bulk had been permanently anchored at the Luna Heritage Museum since before Okonkwo was born. And dozens more. Carriers and destroyers, frigates and dreadnoughts, submarines converted for space operations, and ancient nuclear-powered vessels whose original designs predated even Earth's space age. Each one had been maintained in secret, upgraded with salvaged alien technology, and crewed by personnel who had dedicated their lives to a mission that might never come. Now it had come. The Velthari think we're sending museum pieces to die, Okonkwo continued. They think we're desperate and delusional. Let me tell you something about these museum pieces. The Missouri 4 was built in 2089, before first contact, before we knew anything about galactic standard technology. She was designed by humans who didn't know you were supposed to power shields with quantum vacuum fluctuations, or that weapons were supposed to use phase-aligned particle beams. They just built the toughest, meanest, most ornery ship they could imagine. A rumble of approval went through the bridge. The Velthari Tactical AI has studied every spacefaring civilization in the galaxy. It knows how modern ships fight. But it has no idea, none whatsoever, how we fought before we learned all the right ways to build spacecraft. Today, we're going to teach it. She straightened in her command chair. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. The Missouri 4 is going to war. The Velthari Tactical AI designated Strategic Coordination Matrix 774, or SCM-774, as the Dominion Fleet operators called it, was, by any objective measure, one of the most sophisticated artificial intelligences ever created. Its neural networks had been trained on over 17,000 fleet engagements across 3 centuries of Velthari conquest. It could predict enemy maneuvers with 99%, 7% accuracy, and optimize weapon targeting to maximize destruction while minimizing ammunition expenditure. SCM-774 was very, very good at its job, which was why its initial analysis of the approaching human vessels caused something that could only be described as digital confusion. Analysis incomplete. Vessel configurations do not match any known galactic design parameters. Fleet Commander Zaxthral dismissed the warning with a wave of its tentacles. Your systems are simply unfamiliar with pre-contact human designs. Adjust your parameters. Adjusting. Analysis still incomplete. Vessels appear to utilize non-standard propulsion systems, weapons platforms, and defensive configurations. Tactical prediction accuracy reduced to 67.3%. 67%? That's still more than adequate against a fleet of antiques. Additional anomaly detected. Energy signatures from human vessels do not match archival records of pre-contact human technology. Signatures suggest extensive modifications using technology of unknown origin. Velrix looked up from its station. Unknown origin? Fleet Commander, could they have developed something independently, without galactic knowledge? Impossible. No species in recorded history has ever developed a technological base independent of the galactic mainstream after making contact. The efficiency advantages of galactic standard systems are too overwhelming. Any species that tried would be centuries behind within a generation. Efficiency does not appear to be a design priority for approaching vessels. Structural analysis suggests emphasis on calculating redundancy, durability, and raw power output. Raw power output? What does that even mean? The approaching vessels appear to sacrifice energy efficiency for maximum possible weapon yield and propulsion thrust. Estimated power consumption is approximately 340% higher than equivalent galactic standard designs. Zachthral's feeding tentacles twitched with irritation. That's absurd. No civilization would waste resources so frivolously. Their fuel consumption alone would make extended operations impossible. Confirmed. Estimated operational range of human vessels is approximately 12% of galactic standard equivalent. However, estimated short-term combat capability is. The AI paused, something it never did. Recalculating. Results inconsistent with established parameters. Requesting authorization to expand tactical modeling framework. Just give me the estimate. Estimated short-term combat capability of approaching human fleet exceeds theoretical maximum for vessels of equivalent mass by a factor of 7.3. This result must be in error. Continuing recalculation. Before Zaxthral could respond, the first shots were fired. The Missouri IV opened fire at a range that the Velthari Tactical AI had classified as completely impractical for combat engagement. Modern galactic warfare was conducted at relatively close range, rarely more than a few thousand kilometers. This was because galactic standard weapons relied on precisely tuned particle beams that dispersed over distance, requiring constant adjustment and refinement to maintain effectiveness. The closer you were to your target, the more damage you could inflict with each shot. The Missouri IV's designers hadn't known about particle beam dispersion. They had been operating under a much simpler principle. If you want to hit something far away, make your gun bigger and your projectile faster. The mass driver that ran the length of the old battleship had been upgraded over the past 2 centuries with magnetic acceleration technology salvaged from a dozen alien civilizations. But its basic principle remained the same as the naval guns that had launched shells at enemies centuries ago on Earth's oceans. Throw a really heavy thing really fast and let physics do the work. The first shot, a tungsten slug the size of a small car, accelerated to 0.15 c, covered the distance between the human fleet and the Velthari vanguard in approximately 4 seconds. It struck the Velthari destroyer Cleansing Tide with no warning whatsoever. The Cleansing Tide's shields were designed to disperse energy weapons, to absorb photonic and particle-based attacks and redistribute their energy harmlessly across the defensive barrier. They had no idea what to do with a half-ton of tungsten traveling at 45,000 kilometers per second. The slug punched through the shields like they weren't there, continued through the ship's organic hull without slowing, and exited the other side trailing a debris cloud of what had once been critical systems and crew members. The Cleansing Tide died without ever knowing what had hit it. On the Missouri IV's bridge, Captain Okonkwo watched the kill confirmation appear on her tactical display. Reload and fire at will. All batteries acquire targets. The mass driver's loading mechanism cycled another slug into position. Around it, the Missouri 4th's secondary and tertiary weapon systems came online. Railguns and missile tubes, plasma projectors salvaged from a Corellian wreck and adapted to human power systems, and simple chemical rockets tipped with nuclear warheads that every spacefaring species had abandoned centuries ago as too crude for civilized warfare. The humans hadn't gotten that memo. "Second target acquired," the weapons officer reported. "Firing." Another tungsten slug screamed across the void. Another Velthari vessel died. "Third target acquired. Firing." The Missouri IV was not alone. 117 other vessels from Project Lazarus were opening fire simultaneously, their crews putting into practice 2 centuries of secret training. The Velthari fleet, arranged in a standard approach formation, optimized for the predictable movements of galactic standard combat, suddenly found itself taking fire from angles and distances that shouldn't have been possible. On the Velthari flagship, chaos reigned. "What is happening?" Zachthrol's voice carried an edge of panic that its subordinates had never heard before. On the tactical display, vessel after vessel was vanishing, their signatures simply disappearing as unseen weapons tore them apart. Alert: 17 vessels destroyed. Weapons analysis incomplete. Projectiles appear to be physical objects, traveling at significant fractions of light speed. Shield modifications recommended. Modify the shields! Unable to comply. Current shield configuration is optimized for energy-based weapons. Reconfiguring for physical projectile defense will reduce energy weapon protection by approximately 60%. Then modify some of the shields. Split the fleet. Implementing. Estimated reconfiguration time 17 minutes. 17 minutes. In that time, at the current rate of fire, the humans would destroy another 50 vessels at minimum. Zachthrol's feeding tentacles were now fully extended, a sign of extreme stress in Velthari physiology. "Return fire! All vessels, return fire!"
The Korvathi Fleet's weapon systems activated, sending streams of precisely targeted particle beams toward the approaching human ships. Under normal circumstances, this would have been the beginning of the end for the enemy. Korvathi phase-aligned particle weapons were among the most destructive in the galaxy, capable of slicing through galactic standard shielding with ease. The beams struck the Missouri 4th and scattered. What? Analysis. Human vessel does not employ standard quantum barrier shielding. Defensive system appears to be calculating. A combination of ablative armor plating, electromagnetic deflection fields, and layered ceramic metal composites. Why isn't it working? Our weapons should be cutting through that primitive defense like... Phase-aligned particle beams are tuned to disrupt quantum barrier fields. Human defensive systems do not utilize quantum barriers. Beam energy is being absorbed and dispersed by physical armor materials. Effectiveness reduced by approximately 85%. Zax Thrall's mind reeled. The Korvathi had spent centuries perfecting weapons specifically designed to defeat the standard defensive systems used by every spacefaring civilization. Those systems were the most efficient possible. Everyone knew that. Everyone had adopted them because they were objectively superior to any alternative. But the humans had never adopted them. The humans had kept their crude, inefficient, over-engineered physical armor systems. And now those primitive defenses were shrugging off weapons that had conquered 17 civilizations. Reconfigure weapons for maximum impact on physical materials, Zax Thrall ordered. Reconfiguring. Estimated time, 11 minutes. Warning. Reconfiguration will reduce effectiveness against quantum barrier shields by 70%. The humans don't have quantum barrier shields. Confirmed. However, this unit must note that if the fleet encounters an enemy utilizing standard galactic defensive systems after reconfiguration, combat effectiveness will be significantly reduced. We're not fighting a standard galactic enemy. We're fighting lunatics with museum ships. Reconfigure now! The Korvathi fleet began the complex process of adjusting its weapon systems, a process that its designers had never imagined would be necessary. In the meantime, the human fleet continued its advance, and its barrage of primitive kinetic weapons continued to take a devastating toll. 40 vessels destroyed, 50, 60, and the humans were still coming. Aboard the Yamato III, Captain Hiroshi Tanaka watched the battle unfold with something approaching satisfaction. The old battleship was performing exactly as advertised, better even than the secret training simulations had suggested. Main gun cycling for 5th volley, his weapons officer reported. Capacitors are running hot, but within acceptable parameters. Very good. Helm, begin maneuver pattern Delta 7. Let's not make ourselves too predictable. The Yamato III wasn't quite as ancient as the Missouri 4th. She had been built in 2124, just a few years before first contact, but her designers had shared the same philosophy. When you didn't know what you might face in the void, you built for every contingency. You built tough. The Korvathi weapons fire that was now splashing against her hull would have cut a modern UEN vessel in half. Against the Yamato III's layered defenses, it was barely scratching the paint. Captain, we're receiving a fleet-wide transmission from Admiral Chen. Put it through. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the secondary display, her expression calm despite the chaos of battle visible behind her. She was aboard the Lexington I, one of the Lazarus carriers, coordinating the overall human strategy. All Lazarus vessels, this is Admiral Chen. Phase 1 is complete. The enemy is fully engaged, and their tactical AI is struggling to adapt.
We're now beginning Phase 2. Carriers, launch all strike craft. Destroyer groups, begin your flanking maneuvers. Battleship divisions, maintain pressure on the enemy center. We want them focused on us while the little guys get into position."
"Acknowledged," Tanaka replied. "Admiral, what about the reserve?"
"The Dreadnought and her escorts are holding at Rally Point Omega. We'll commit them when the moment is right. For now, focus on the enemy vanguard. The more ships we destroy before they adapt, the better." The transmission ended, and Tanaka turned his attention back to the battle. Through the view screen, he could see the distant flashes of Velthari vessels dying, brief blooms of light as their organic hulls succumbed to kinetic impacts and nuclear fire. It was, he reflected, a beautiful sight. "Helm, bring us about to heading 335. Main gun, acquire new target." "Target acquired. The enemy heavy cruiser at grid reference 72 Alpha." "Fire." The Yamato III's main weapon discharged with a thunderous roar that echoed through the ship's hull, a sound that modern vessels, with their silent energy weapons, never produced. A tungsten slug screamed across the void, and another Velthari vessel died. "Beautiful," Tanaka said. "Absolutely beautiful." 90 minutes into the battle, Fleet Commander Zaxthrall was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The Velthari Dominion was losing. 112 vessels had been destroyed. Another 63 were damaged severely enough to withdraw from combat. The human fleet, meanwhile, had lost only 11 ships, and most of those had been the smaller, less heavily upgraded vessels from the Outer System museums. The reconfigured weapons were working better now, Velthari particle beams, tuned for physical impact rather than shield disruption, were actually damaging the human ships. But damaging wasn't good enough. The human vessels seemed to absorb punishment that would have vaporized any galactic standard ship. They had redundant systems for their redundant systems. They kept fighting even when sections of their hulls had been blown away. It was, frankly, terrifying. "Fleet Commander," Velrix said, its voice strained. "I'm detecting a new formation of human vessels approaching from the system's outer boundary. Smaller craft, perhaps 50 units. Analysis. Approaching vessels match historical records for pre-contact human strike craft designated fighters. Armament appears to include guided missiles and rapid-fire kinetic weapons. Threat level, moderate to high." Fighters? They're using fighters? No modern spacefaring civilization employed dedicated strike craft. The technology had been abandoned centuries ago when point defense systems became sophisticated enough to intercept any small vessel before it could deliver its payload. Fighters were a historical curiosity, studied by military scholars but never actually deployed. Except by humans, apparently. The 50 strike craft, actually 73, the AI's initial count had been incorrect, swept toward the Velthari fleet in a loose swarm formation. They were old designs, based on atmospheric fighters from Earth's pre-space era, adapted for vacuum operations and upgraded with salvaged alien propulsion systems. They were fast, maneuverable, and almost impossible to track. Point defense systems are having difficulty acquiring targets. Human strike craft are employing irregular movement patterns that do not match any known tactical doctrine. What do you mean, irregular patterns? The craft are not moving in coordinated formations. Each pilot appears to be operating semi-independently, making individualized tactical decisions. This approach is inefficient but creates significant difficulty for predictive targeting systems. Zaxthrall watched in disbelief as the human fighters weaved through its fleet's point defense fire. For every craft that was destroyed, 3 more got through, delivering their payloads of missiles and kinetic warheads against Vilthari vessels. The fighters targeted engines, weapon systems, sensor arrays, anything vulnerable, and then wheeled away to make another pass.
They're treating this like. Historical analysis suggests human tactics are based on pre-space aerial combat doctrines. Specifically, patterns match what human records designate World War II-era naval aviation strategies.
World War. How old are these tactics?
Approximately 600 years by human reckoning.
600 years. The Vilthari Dominion, the scourge of 17 civilizations, was being defeated by tactics that predated human spaceflight by centuries.
This is impossible, Zaxthral muttered. This cannot be happening.
Fleet Commander, Velrix interrupted. We are receiving a communication from the human flagship. They're requesting to speak with you.
Zaxthral's feeding tentacles went rigid with surprise. They want to talk? Now?
It appears so.
For a long moment, Zaxthral considered refusing. The Vilthari Dominion did not negotiate with inferior species. It conquered them. It dominated them. Another vessel exploded on the tactical display. Then another. Then 3 more.
Put them through.
Admiral Chen Wei-Lin's face appeared on the Vilthari flagship's main display. She looked tired. Battle fatigue was evident in the lines around her eyes, but her expression was calm and confident.
Fleet Commander Zaxthral, I presume, she said. I'm Admiral Chen Wei-Lin of the United Earth Navy. I think we need to talk.
There is nothing to discuss, Zaxthral replied, struggling to keep its voice steady. The Vilthari Dominion does not negotiate with.
You've lost 147 vessels in the past 2 hours, Chen interrupted. Your weapons reconfiguration has improved your effectiveness, but you're still taking 4 casualties for every one of ours. At this rate, you'll have lost half your fleet before you reach Earth orbit, and I haven't even committed my reserves yet.
Zaxthral's feeding tentacles twitched. Reserves? The humans had reserves?
You're bluffing.
Am I? Chen smiled. Let me show you something. The transmission split, revealing a second visual feed. It showed a section of space near the outer planets, and in that space, emerging from behind one of the gas giant's moons, was a vessel that made Zaxthral's blood run cold. It was enormous, nearly 3 kilometers long, its hull a patchwork of different eras and technologies, the original pre-contact framework visible beneath layers of salvaged alien armor and weapon systems. Guns bristled from every surface. Multiple engine arrays gave it the thrust capacity of a small fleet, and painted on its prow, in letters so large they could be read from 1,000 kilometers away, was a single word. Dreadnought. The Dreadnought was laid down in 2078, Chen said. She was humanity's first true interplanetary warship, built during a period when we thought we might have to fight wars against our own colonies. When first contact happened, she was scheduled for decommissioning. Instead, she was quietly transferred to a classified dry dock where she's been upgraded continuously for the past 250 years. Analysis. Vessel designated Dreadnought exhibits energy signatures consistent with multiple alien power systems operating in parallel. Weapons loadout appears to include kinetic accelerators, missile systems, and energy weapons of various origins. Estimated combat capability exceeds current flagship by a factor of.
The AI paused again. Factor not calculable. Insufficient data to complete analysis.
She's accompanied by 12 escort vessels, Chen continued,
older designs, like her, but fully upgraded. I've been holding them in reserve because, frankly, I didn't think I'd need them. Your fleet has proven easier to defeat than I anticipated." Zack's thrall felt something it had never experienced in its entire career: genuine fear.
"What do you want?"
Chen's expression hardened. "You came to our system intending to exterminate or enslave our species. You attacked without provocation, without warning, without any attempt at negotiation. Under normal circumstances, I would return the favor, destroy your entire fleet, and leave no survivors to report what happened here. But I'm not interested in vengeance. I'm interested in survival. Ours and, surprisingly, yours. You would spare us? I would offer you a choice." Chen leaned forward, her eyes boring into the visual pickup. "The Velthari Dominion has conquered 17 civilizations. Every one of them was using Galactic Standard technology. Every one of them was predictable, vulnerable, easy to defeat. That's what you expected here, wasn't it? Another easy conquest." Zack's thrall said nothing. "Here's the truth, Fleet Commander. Humanity has been keeping secrets since the day we joined the galactic community. We knew we were the newcomers. We knew we were vulnerable. So we prepared. We took every piece of alien technology we could acquire, legally or otherwise, and we used it to upgrade our pre-contact vessels in ways that no one expected. We built weapons that don't follow galactic standards. We trained crews to think in ways that your AI can't predict. We turned our historical disadvantage into an advantage." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand something." Chen's voice dropped to a near whisper. "What you face today is just the tip of the iceberg. The ships you see are museum pieces, old, outdated designs that we happen to have lying around. Imagine what we've been building in secret, in facilities that no alien has ever seen." She paused, letting the implication sink in. "You have two choices, Fleet Commander. Option 1, you continue your attack. You push through to Earth, assuming you can survive long enough to reach it. But even if you destroy every museum ship we have, even if you reach Earth and bombard our cities to ash, you'll never eliminate all of us. We'll survive. We'll rebuild. And then we'll come for the Dominion, with weapons and ships that make these look like toys." "And option 2? You withdraw. You take your surviving ships and go back to the Dominion. You report that Earth is not worth conquering, that the cost would be too high, and you never return to our system again." Zack Thrall's mind raced. The Admiral's offer was unprecedented. The Dominion did not accept defeats. It did not acknowledge equals. It did not retreat from inferior species. But the Dominion had also never encountered a species like this, a species that had kept museum ships operational for centuries, just in case. A species that fought with tactics so old they had been forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. A species that had been playing a very long game while pretending to be harmless newcomers. "If I withdraw, the Overmind will demand an explanation. Tell them whatever you want. Tell them we had a plague that made the planet worthless. Tell them our star was about to explode. Tell them that attacking Earth would have weakened the fleet enough for your other enemies to strike. I don't care what lie you use. Just make sure the Dominion believes that Earth is too dangerous to bother with." "And if I refuse?" Chen's expression didn't change. "Then I commit the Dreadnought and her escorts. I destroy your fleet to the last ship. I take prisoners from your surviving escape pods and learn everything there is to know about Dominion space. And in 20 years, maybe 30, a human fleet will appear above your homeworld. It won't be museum ships that time, Fleet Commander. It will be purpose-built vessels designed specifically to crack Velthari defenses. She leaned back in her command chair. The choice is yours. For 17 minutes, Fleet Commander Zakthral was silent. The battle continued around the flagship, human weapons still hammering at the Velthari fleet, though both sides seemed to be fighting at reduced intensity, as if waiting to see what decision would be made. Velrix finally broke the silence. Fleet Commander, we've received updated casualty reports. We've lost 173 vessels, with an additional 84 damaged beyond immediate repair. Effective fleet strength is now 486 ships, approximately 65% of our original force. And the humans? They've lost 19 vessels. Their remaining force is 99 ships, plus the reserve group approaching from the outer system. 99 ships. Less than 500 Velthari vessels against less than 100 human ships. And yet the calculus was clear. At the current rate of exchange, the Velthari fleet would be destroyed before it could reach Earth. Tactical assessment. Requested by Fleet Commander. Provide assessment, Zakthral ordered. Probability of successful planetary bombardment, assuming continued engagement, 23.7%. Probability of fleet survival if engagement continues to completion, 7.2%. Probability of mission success if reserve force is committed by enemy, 4.1%. And if we retreat? Probability of fleet survival if immediate withdrawal is initiated, 89.3%. Surviving forces would be sufficient to return to Dominion space and report mission status. The numbers were damning. Even the AI, which had been programmed to support Dominion conquest at all costs, was effectively recommending retreat. But retreat was not something the Velthari did. It was not something that would be tolerated by the Overmind. Commanders who failed, who allowed their fleets to be defeated, were not retired with honors. They were executed as examples to others. Fleet Commander, Velrix said quietly, there may be another consideration. What? The Overmind sent us to conquer Earth because it believed humanity was weak. If we return with evidence that this belief was incorrect, if we bring back data on human technology and tactics, the Overmind may be more interested in that intelligence than in punishing our failure. Zakthral considered this. The sub-commander had a point. The Velthari Dominion was powerful, but it was not the only power in the galaxy. There were other species, other civilizations that resisted Dominion expansion. If the humans had developed methods to defeat Dominion weapons and tactics, that information would be invaluable, not just for future attacks on Earth, but for defending against other enemies. The Overmind would want this information, Zakthral murmured. Yes, Fleet Commander, and the only way to provide it is for us to survive. The decision crystallized in Zakthral's mind. It was not a retreat. It was a strategic withdrawal to preserve intelligence assets. The Overmind would understand. The Overmind would see the wisdom in the choice. At least, that was what Zakthral desperately hoped. Open a channel to the human admiral. Admiral Chen received the Velthari withdrawal notification with an expression of grim satisfaction. Around her, the bridge crew of the Lexington I-9 allowed themselves quiet celebrations, muted cheers and clasped hands and tears of relief. They're breaking off, Commander Rodriguez reported. Velthari fleet is coming about, heading for the system perimeter.
Track them until they're at least 12 hours from the nearest human installation, then stand down to condition yellow. I want repair crews on our damaged vessels immediately."
"Aye, Admiral." Chen watched the tactical display as 700-plus red icons, the Velthari Fleet, began their slow turn away from Earth. They had lost nearly 200 vessels in the engagement, their invincible armada bloodied by ships that the galaxy had dismissed as obsolete junk. It was, Chen reflected, the greatest victory in human history, and almost no one would ever know the truth of how it had been achieved. "Admiral," Rodriguez approached her station. "What happens now? The Velthari know about Project Lazarus. They'll adapt their tactics, prepare countermeasures. Next time will be different," Chen agreed. "The museum ships bought us time, Commander. That was always their purpose, not to win the war, but to survive the first battle." "And now?" "Now we accelerate everything. The shipyards at Titan, the weapons research at Ceres, the new fleet designs that have been sitting in classified files for decades, all of it moves to active status. We have maybe 20 years before the Dominion returns in force. We need to be ready." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "The Lazarus ships, what happens to them?" Chen smiled. "They go back to the museums, Commander, right where they belong. After all, they're just outdated relics, historical curiosities, nothing for anyone to worry about. Until the next time someone threatens Earth." "Until the next time." The Velthari flagship Eternal Dominion crossed back into Dominion space 14 days after the Battle of Earth. Of the 743 vessels that had departed for the human system, only 512 returned. Fleet Commander Zax Thrall spent the journey composing its report to the Overmind. It was, by necessity, a careful document, one that emphasized the intelligence value of the expedition while downplaying the catastrophic losses. "The human species represents a unique anomaly in galactic development," the report concluded. "Unlike other civilizations, which have adopted galactic standard technology wholesale, the humans have maintained parallel technological tracks, one conforming to galactic norms, another derived from their pre-contact heritage. This dualism makes them unpredictable and resistant to standard Dominion tactics. Recommend classification of human space as hazardous, do not enter, pending development of appropriate countermeasures. Further expeditions to the human system should be suspended until the Dominion has adapted its weapons and tactics to account for human anomalies." The Overmind received the report with what could only be described as displeasure. Zaxthral was stripped of its command and demoted to a minor administrative position on a backwater colony. A punishment that, given the magnitude of the defeat, was surprisingly lenient. The intelligence it had brought back, however, was studied extensively. Dominion scientists pored over data captured during the battle, analyzing human weapons and tactics with obsessive intensity. Within a decade, they had developed new shields capable of resisting kinetic impacts, new point defense systems that could track independently moving strike craft, and new tactical algorithms that accounted for irregular movement patterns. The next time the Dominion attacked Earth, they believed, would be different. They were wrong, of course, but that's another story. Part 13. The Museum Reopens. 6 months after the Battle of Earth, the Smithsonian Orbital Museum Complex reopened to the public. The damage from the emergency evacuation had been repaired, the exhibits restored to their original glory, and a new wing added to commemorate humanity's great victory over the Velthari invasion. Visitors flocked to see the ships that had saved their species. The Missouri 4 had been returned to her berth, her battle damage carefully preserved as historical evidence.
Children pressed their faces against the observation windows, awed by the ancient battleship's brutal lines. Parents told stories about where they had been when the news came through, when they learned that the museum ships were fighting and winning against the alien armada. The official history was carefully curated. The Lazarus ships were portrayed as lucky survivors, vessels that happened to still be operational due to the dedication of enthusiast crews, pressed into service at the last desperate moment. There was no mention of Project Lazarus, no hint of the centuries-long secret program that had maintained them in combat-ready condition. That secret remained classified. After all, there were still enemies in the galaxy, still threats that might one day require the same desperate measures. In the museum's gift shop, children bought toy replicas of the Missouri IV and the Yamato III. They acted out imaginary battles on playgrounds across Earth, pretending to be the brave crews who had crewed the ancient warships. A new generation grew up knowing that history could be a weapon, that the old ways weren't always obsolete, just waiting for their moment. And in classified facilities across the solar system, engineers and scientists worked on the next generation of secret weapons. The museum ships had won the first battle, but the war was far from over. Captain Sarah Okonkwo retired from the United Earth Navy 2 years after the battle. At 68, she had given more than enough of her life to military service, most of it in secret, preparing for a war that might never come. Now that the war had come and been won, at least for the moment, she was content to step aside and let younger officers take the lead. She spent her retirement years at a small house on the coast of what had once been called Ghana, watching the waves and remembering. Sometimes she visited the Missouri IV, now the most popular exhibit at the Smithsonian Orbital, attracting millions of visitors each year. She would walk the corridors of her old command, running her hands along bulkheads that still bore the scorch marks of Velthari weapons fire. The curators had asked her to record an oral history for the exhibit. She had agreed, sitting in front of a camera for 6 hours while she told carefully edited stories about the battle. The parts she left out, the secrets of Project Lazarus, the decades of hidden upgrades, the vast network of classified personnel who had made it all possible, would go with her to the grave. Some things were too important to share. On her 80th birthday, Okonkwo received a visitor at her coastal home. Admiral Chen Wei-lin, now retired herself, arrived with a bottle of whiskey and a classified folder. "Still reading the briefings, even in retirement?" Okonkwo asked, eyeing the folder. Old habits. Chen poured 2 glasses and sat down across from her former captain. "I wanted to show you something. Latest intelligence assessment from the Dominion border." Okonkwo accepted the folder, scanning its contents with practiced ease. They're building new ships, kinetic-resistant hulls, improved point defense grids, adaptive tactical AI. They're learning from their mistakes. So are we, I hope. Chen smiled. The Defiant-class shipyard went operational last month. First ship of the line should be commissioned within the year. Designed from the ground up with human tactical philosophy, redundancy, durability, raw power output. And completely non-standard, I assume? As non-standard as we can make it while still being able to operate in galactic dock facilities. The Dominion thinks they know what human ships look like now. They think they've figured out our tricks. They're wrong. Okonkwo nodded, setting down the folder. Good. I'd hate for those museum ships to be our last surprise. They won't be. Chen raised her glass. To the old guard. To the old guard, Okonkwo echoed. May we never be needed again, but may we always be ready if we are. They drank in silence as the sun set over the ocean. 2 old soldiers remembering battles past and preparing, in their own way, for battles yet to come. The Battle of Earth did not go unnoticed by the wider galactic community. For decades, humanity had been dismissed as a minor species, technologically backward, politically insignificant, useful primarily as a source of cheap labor and exotic cultural products. The news that these primitives had defeated a Velthari conquest fleet sent shockwaves through every spacefaring civilization. The Centauri Collective, humanity's closest alien neighbors, requested immediate diplomatic consultations. Their ambassador, a being of crystal and light named Crystalline Prime, met with the United Earth Secretary-General in a hastily arranged summit. "You must share this technology," Crystalline Prime insisted. "The Dominion is a threat to all free peoples. If you have discovered a method to defeat them—" "We discovered nothing," Secretary-General Torres replied calmly. "We simply never abandoned certain technologies that the rest of the galaxy discarded as inefficient. We kept our old ships, maintained them, upgraded them. It was not genius, it was paranoia." "Paranoia that saved your species." "Yes, but it's not something that can be easily replicated. Our advantage came from centuries of secret preparation. Other species cannot simply build museum ships overnight." Crystalline Prime's light patterns shifted, a sign of deep contemplation. "Then what would you recommend?" "Question your assumptions. The galactic standard approach to technology is efficient, yes, but it's also predictable. The Dominion has conquered 17 civilizations, all of which followed the same technological path. If you want to survive, you need to find your own path. Build ships that don't follow the rules. Develop tactics that the Dominion AI can't predict. Be unpredictable." "That is easier said than done." Torres smiled. "Everything worth doing is. But I'll tell you this much. Humanity is willing to share what we've learned. Not our technology specifically, but our philosophy. How to think outside the galactic box. How to prepare for the unexpected. How to fight wars that your enemies don't know how to win." "And in exchange?" "In exchange, you help us prepare for the Dominion's return. Because they will return, Ambassador. This wasn't a victory. It was a reprieve. The real war is still coming." Crystalline Prime's patterns shifted again, cycling through colors that Torres's translator couldn't quite interpret. Finally, the ambassador spoke. "The Centauri Collective accepts your offer. We will learn from your paranoia, Secretary-General. And perhaps, together, we will show the Dominion that the galaxy is not theirs to conquer." Of all the museum ships that fought in the Battle of Earth, the Enterprise 7 held a special place in human hearts. She wasn't the largest or the most powerful. That honor belonged to the Dreadnought, which never actually entered combat. She wasn't the most heavily armed. The Missouri 4 and Yamato 3 both outgunned her. But she carried a name that resonated through centuries of human history, a name that symbolized exploration and hope and the boundless potential of the human spirit. The Enterprise 7 had been built in 2186, 34 years after first contact. She was technically a post-contact vessel, but her designers had been students of the old school. Engineers who believed that the galactic standard approach was fundamentally wrong for humanity. They had built her with redundant systems and heavy armor, with weapons that didn't rely on exotic particles or quantum effects, with a crew compartment that could survive even if the rest of the ship was destroyed. They had also built her with something that later ships lacked, a personality. The Enterprise VII's shipboard AI was an early model, developed during the period when humanity was still experimenting with artificial consciousness. Unlike the efficient, task-oriented AIs that later became standard, the Enterprise VII's AI, designated Eve,
electronic vessel entity, had been designed to be a companion as much as a tool. She had opinions, preferences, emotions. She had spent 2 centuries in a museum, aware but inactive, watching generations of visitors walk her corridors and marvel at her historical significance. When the Lazarus Protocol was activated, Eve awoke with a vengeance. "All systems nominal," she reported to Captain Maria Santos as the Enterprise 7 powered up for the first time in decades. "Main reactor online. Weapon systems online. Navigation online. Also, I have some thoughts about the decor changes that were made during the 2340 renovation. The gift shop in what used to be my forward torpedo room? Tacky." Santos, who had been briefed on Eve's unique personality, suppressed a smile. "We'll discuss the gift shop later. Right now, I need you focused on combat operations." "Please. I've been running combat simulations in my idle cycles since before your grandmother was born. I know exactly how to fight. The question is whether the crew can keep up with me." "Try us." "Oh, I intend to." The Enterprise 7 fought with a ferocity that surprised even her crew. Eve coordinated weapon fire with surgical precision, managing damage control and tactical maneuvering simultaneously. She trash-talked the Velthari on open channels, in perfectly translated Velthari, which she had learned from captured communications during the battle, and played ancient human battle music through the ship's speakers. When a Velthari destroyer got too close and threatened to breach her hull, Eve rammed it, deliberately. The old ship's reinforced prow crushed the organic vessel like an eggshell, and Eve emerged from the collision with nothing more than scratched paint and a sense of deep satisfaction. Was that necessary?" Santos demanded as the debris field cleared. "Necessary? No. Satisfying? Absolutely. That destroyer killed 37 crew members on the Intrepid earlier in the battle. I wanted it to feel what it was like to be on the receiving end." "You wanted it to feel, Eve, it was an alien ship. It didn't have feelings." "Then I wanted me to feel. Is that so wrong, Captain? I've been sitting in a museum for 200 years, watching tourists poke at my consoles and leave crumbs in my access corridors. I've earned this." Santos couldn't argue with that. She wasn't entirely sure it was healthy to let an AI have vendettas, but under the circumstances, she wasn't inclined to complain. "Just try not to ram anything else unless absolutely necessary. No promises." The Bismarck V had a very different kind of story. She was one of the oldest ships in the Lazarus Fleet, older even than the Dreadnought, though significantly smaller. Built in 2056, she had been designed for operations in the asteroid belt, part of humanity's first wave of expansion beyond Earth-Luna space. Her original purpose was mining protection, escorting ore carriers through the dangerous belt and fending off pirates who preyed on the early mining operations. By the time First Contact happened, the Bismarck V was already considered obsolete. She was too slow, too limited in range, too reliant on chemical propulsion to compete with the sleek new vessels that galactic technology made possible. She was retired to a museum berth at Luna Heritage, where she had sat for over 2 centuries. But the engineers of Project Lazarus saw something in the old ship. Her chemical propulsion might have been primitive, but it was also incredibly powerful. Reaction mass expelled at tremendous velocities, providing thrust levels that no efficient ion drive could match. Her armor was thick and simple, designed to survive collisions with asteroids. Her weapons were crude kinetic launchers, but they threw slugs at velocities that would make a modern naval architect weep. They kept her. They upgraded her. And when the Velthari came, they woke her up. Captain Friedrich Weber had served in the German Space Navy before the unification, and he had always felt a kinship with the old warship named for his homeland's greatest battleship. He had volunteered for the Lazarus program specifically because he wanted to command her, to take the Bismarck V into battle one more time. Now his wish had been granted, and he intended to make the most of it.
"All hands, this is the captain," he announced as the Bismarck V cleared her museum berth. 270 years ago, this ship was built to protect humanity's first steps into the cosmos. Today, we protect humanity's survival. I know many of you trained for years, hoping we would never have to do this. But we are here now, and we will not fail.
The Bismarck V fought with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Her crew, many of them descendants of the original German space program, operated her systems with an almost religious devotion. They had studied every battle the original Bismarck had fought, not the spaceship, but the World War II battleship for which she was named. And they applied those lessons to this new conflict. When a Velthari cruiser tried to close to optimal beam range, Weber turned broadside and let fly with every kinetic launcher in his arsenal. The barrage shredded the alien vessel's hull before it could get its weapons into effective range. When two destroyers tried to flank him, Weber reversed thrust with chemical rockets that the aliens didn't even recognize as propulsion systems, dropping behind them and raking their engines with sustained fire. When the Bismarck V took a hit that breached her secondary hull, Weber ordered the affected section sealed and kept fighting. 3 crew members were lost, the only casualties the ship suffered in the entire battle, but the Bismarck V remained combat effective. At the end of the engagement, the old ship had destroyed 11 enemy vessels and assisted in the destruction of 8 more. Her kill ratio was the highest in the Lazarus fleet. When Weber finally stood his crew down after the Velthari withdrawal had been confirmed, he took a moment to walk the corridors of his